Hey everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hash Rate Happy Hour podcast. On today's show, my guest is Dave Meyer. Dave is the general manager at Glencoe Light Power, a municipal power company in rural Minnesota that services a town of just over 5,000 people. What makes Glencoe Light Power so unique is that they are also home to a 10 megawatt Bitcoin mining facility. On today's show, Dave and I will talk through the strategies that a municipal power company utilizes to source its power, how the conversations began to have such a large Bitcoin mining facility as a customer of theirs, and how Glencoe Light Power is viewing that relationship today. This is a fascinating conversation. Dave is a wealth of knowledge on all things power and brings a phenomenal perspective on how Bitcoin mining is perceived by a power company. So with that, I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Dave Meyer. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the intro, I'm here with Dave Meyer. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Really appreciate your time. I think the best place for us to start in the conversation is to maybe get a little bit of your background. I'd love to hear how you got into power and what brought you to Glencoe Light Power.
Uh, Well, I started in going to line school in Wadena in 1987, 88. And worked on power lines, worked at a number of different utilities throughout the last 30 plus years, and got the opportunity to come and be the general manager in Glencoe back in 2010. So my family and I moved here and took on this endeavor.
Awesome. So being the general manager, can you touch on some of the responsibilities that you have at Glencoe?
Uh, Glencoe Light Power is a municipal electric utility. We have around 2,700 customers. There's 14 full-time people here, including myself. We have line workers, we have generation operators, and we have our customer service or office staff. And our responsibilities here, at least the way I look at it, is to provide the most reliable and affordable power we can to the customers of Glencoe Light Power.
Sure. And that actually brings up kind of an interesting question or something that I'm interested in is, when Glencoe is looking at providing the power and you operating as a business, do you guys have kind of cut and dry growth targets? Just you standard companies have growth targets. They want to grow by X%. Do you guys have targets like that, or you guys view growth differently?
I guess I personally view growth differently for a municipal utility. In Minnesota, there's service territories, which means there's the boundary in which you operate. If you live within the geographical boundaries of Glencoe Light and Power Service Territory, then you buy your power from us. If you live within the neighboring cooperatives territory, then you buy your power from them. And that's the way it works in Minnesota, and good, bad, or indifferent, that's the way it is. So as a municipal electric utility, we grow, quite frankly, as fast as our town grows. If people or industry are moving into town, then we grow and accommodate that. And if people or industry are moving out of town, then we would get smaller.
Sure. And yeah, just on the subject of, if that were the case of getting smaller, that you guys are unique being a municipal because you guys are sourcing your power, correct? That you're not generating the power that you're providing?
Well, we have generation capabilities here. We have significant generation capabilities here, but they're deemed as standby generation. We do not use them on a daily basis. We'll use them in a case of emergency or in cases of supporting the grid. The bulk of our power comes via contracts or buying on the real-time or day-ahead market. Us, along with 11 other cities, are members of Compass, Central Municipal Power Agency and Services. which is it's called a joint action agency. And that joint action agency's responsibilities are to its members is to uh, put out RFPs, request power contracts, look for power contracts that we can enter into that best suit the needs of each of our individual entities.
Yeah, see that side of it's so unique. I mean, when you think about Minnesota Power, and I born and raised here, so I'm used to the XL energies of the world, but I also spent a year and a half down in Dallas, Texas, where it's unregulated, and I mean, you can go and get, as a resident, I could go and get like 6 months worth of power at one company at one rate, and then when that ended, go and get a different rate. So, when you think of Minnesota, you think, well, it's just they tell me what the power rate is, and that's what it is. But what's fascinating is you guys on the back end are sourcing different contracts, different cost rates, different things like that. Am I understanding that right? Is that how that works?
Well, we are, and the members of our agency are. So I don't want to speak for XL or Minnesota Power
Sure,
or
sure.
any of the co-ops, but um, XL Energy is a very large G&T, a generation and transmission. They own generation assets, they own transmission assets, and they own the distribution assets to go to the homes. So GRE is regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, and they establish their rates based on presumably what their costs are, just like any other utility does. Um, there are some municipalities or cooperatives that are part of an all requirement contract, which means that they, along with all their other uh, entities that are part of this larger organization, that they have to get all their power from this entity, and that's just the way it is. Um, in the case of our agency, I call it an a la carte agency. If the folks at our agency go and do an RFP for X amount of power, uh, they'll poll the members and say who maybe has a flavor for some of this energy, who has a need for this in their portfolio, and then they will go and find out pricing on that, and then we, the 12 individual members of this joint action agency, determine if we want to take a part of that as a contract that we enter into long term. In the case of Glencoe, without going into details, we have a pretty diverse portfolio through our power agency. We do have a small amount of energy that we've contracted long term that is coming from a newer coal plant. We have energy that is coming from wind farms. We have energy that is coming from a renewable methane gas plant from a landfill gas. We also purchase power or the agency schedules and purchases power on the day ahead in the real-time market for us. And I think that diverse portfolio really helps us to keep our costs lower.
Sure. I would imagine. And again, for me personally, that's very eye opening to hear that broad of a mix for the generation and for the source of the power. When looking at your own power sourcing, is volume working in your favor? So let's just say you have your own customers that you grow your customer base. You have a big manufacturing plant come to town. You have a pretty big growth in volume for electrical needs. Is that going to help with the overall power rate that you get? It's volume based, like rebating, I guess, in a different world. But do you guys get discounts or cheaper electrical rates for a larger volume?
You can when the agency goes out for an RFP on a power contract. There's times that the agency has worked in conjunction with other outside entities to create a bigger deal that's more attractive to that generating facility that's looking to sell that power. So we can do things like that. So there can be some economies in scale. And again, the scale is going to vary depending on who has the excess that they're willing to sell. and how much they have.
Sure.
So it's I wish I was smart enough to explain it to you a lot better than I am right now. It's it's an interesting thing, and it's just ever changing. And yeah, we're fortunate. I mean, uh, me and the colleagues in our agency, we keep an eye on this stuff, but we also have the folks in our agency that are watching it closely for us too.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job explaining it to me. I mean, this all, I'm tracking. This all makes sense. So, I guess kind of in that same thread of, the large load customers, one of the things that I hear and that, being in the Bitcoin mining space that you hear a lot is, well, larger loads are more attractive for a power company. Can you maybe talk to that a little bit?
Well, you can use the term larger loads are more attractive, but actually, what's really attractive to a power company is steady loads. And I've thought about this because Ben, you and I talked a little bit before this program, and I've been trying to think of an analogy that
Okay.
that is kind of simplistic, um, just because it's a tough concept to understand. But um, load factor is a term in our industry, and load factor is basically how much your peak is in any given year compared to how much you actually use, or how much your peak is in any given month. Because when infrastructure gets built to feed something, it has to get built big enough to handle the peak, even though you'll seldom use it. So you go buy that 7 passenger SUV because one time a year you take 7 people to a Vikings game, but the rest of the year it's you and your spouse driving around,
Okay,
and
that's a
occasionally
great
somebody in the
analogy.
back. You know,
Yeah.
so you went and bought this $80,000 SUV because one time a year you got to transport 7 people, but the vast majority of the time you're only transporting two. Whereas if you bought that thing and year round you transported 7 people in it, you're maximizing that investment. So when you take something like a data center that is, for lack of a better way of putting it, spinning the meter at full blast 24/7, that's what makes them attractive because they're maximizing the use of of the facilities you built to serve them.
I love that analogy. And I may use that again because I seldom hear, a great way to explain why you overbuild. And that's a perfect way to put it. Or oversupply rather. I don't know, necessarily that you're
Right.
overbuilding, or probably a little of both, but yeah, that's a phenomenal way. And so sticking with that analogy, is there an advantage then also to have not only a large load customer, seven person SUV that you're driving around full all the time, but then when you need to tell somebody to get out of the car because they need the space for something else, or load shedding or curtailment, um, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective, or Glencoe Light, perspective.
Well, and that's one of the things we did when this company wanted to come in and put a data center here. Um, you know, we examined a number of things, and probably the very first thing in the conversation we had between my commissioners and I, as far as attempting to establish a rate for this classification of customer, um, and determining to take this task on or not, was we wanted to make sure that it would in no way affect adversely affect the reliability or the costs to our existing customers. And that's a promise we made to ourselves right up front. And we have not had an adverse impact financially or reliability wise with our customers. And we won't. And I'm very confident of that. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have, you know, taken on this endeavor.
Yeah, and this is perfect lead in because I wanted to ask you quite a bit about, so Glencoe Light and Power took on a Bitcoin mining company as a customer. And so I'd love to hear how that conversation started. So like you just said, you guys, your number one priority was protect your existing customer base and not have anything happen to that. But how did the conversation start?
Um, I actually I started working, had conversations with a different company, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, and trying to find out if we could make something work for them. Because at the end of the day, they're looking for a rate, uh, and because that's the bulk of their costs are their energy costs.
Yep.
So if they can't find an inexpensive rate, then they can't make their product work. So we sat down and had those conversations and talked about what kind of rate structure we come up with. Um, in every electric utility out there that I'm aware of, they have different rate categories. They have different classifications of customers. You don't build a rate for an individual customer. You build a rate for a rate class. You have your residential class customers. You have your small commercial customers. You have your large commercial. You might have your small industrial, large industrial. It all varies with the utility, but each utility will have their classifications of customers.
Sure.
And whoever that customer is, whatever category they fall in, that's the rate they pay. So we did not have a rate established for a what we've termed a large power rate tariff customer. So we explored that to find out what it would cost us to serve them and what we would need in margins to continue to serve them adequately. And we came up with a large power rate. And any customer that meets the criteria of a 90% plus load factor and a minimum of a 2 megawatt load would fall into that category.
And so now you have this established bracket
Yep.
that a customer can fall into.
Yep. And if the next company comes in and we are able to serve them and they fall into that category, then that's the rate that they would be served under. Just like any other customer that comes in, if a large retail store wanted to come in, if their load characteristics put them in a large commercial rate, then that's what they'd be charged. We can't build a special rate for a special individual customer. You can only have rate classifications.
Yeah, that for me that makes sense. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, is that because of the regulations in Minnesota? Because I asked that because having had conversations with some other power companies, it sounds like the regulatory work to establish those types of rates take some time. I'd love to hear if that was the case for you guys, or.
Well, we spent a fair amount of time looking to establish this rate, and yes, it is the rules we have to abide by. And I'm actually happy to abide by those because the last thing you want is your customers pointing fingers at each other saying, well, how come you get this and how come he gets this? And because that isn't fair anyway.
Yeah, it definitely keeps the playing field level. Yeah.
And that's the intent of it, and I think it's a good intent.
Yeah. Wow. So 2 years ago they approached you. That's pretty cool to hear that, because again, I don't think the narrative out there is that the power companies were having these conversations.
It was probably over 2 years ago, to be honest with you. The first conversations I had with this. Somewhere
And
in the back
how
of my mind, somebody put it in my head that we should have a data center here. So I've let that float around in the back of my mind for a number of years. And honestly, the opportunity to pursue something like this or to look at something like this just kind of it landed in my lap because of a colleague of mine in a meeting he was in. And I started visiting with a potential customer to see if we could make something work. And I really enjoyed the people. I really enjoyed those folks, but unfortunately, we weren't able to make something work. And all of a sudden, this customer contacted me, and we started having a conversation, and we developed a really nice relationship. We talked about things both entities very upfront with each other on the costs and the realities of the business and things of that, and it's gone well.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. When looking at the infrastructure, did you guys have to upgrade your infrastructure or get new infrastructure in place for something like that?
Well, we were kind of fortunate. We owned a piece of land immediately next to our substation, so we were able to dedicate a feeder straight out of our substation and feed them right next door to it. So
Wow.
that's one of the reasons that I kind of looked into this, because I was kind of aware of that land and thought that it might work out well. Um,
Sure.
it's a cool undertaking. I believe that not positive, but I believe that Glencoe has the first data mining operation of this size in Minnesota that I'm aware of. There's data centers, the cloud and stuff like that, but I think this is the first one, and I think it's kind of neat.
Yeah, that's very cool. We have like your traditional data centers up here in the Twin Cities, but none like that. Not, or at least not that I'm aware of. There may be some out there, but um, yeah, it's very cool and very very interesting. How are those conversations going now? I don't have people reached out even more, or have you not heard from anybody else since then?
I've had a couple people reach out. There's some other utilities in the state that are working with potential customers now, trying to establish some stuff. I believe there's some work going on up in Brainerd but I'm not sure where it's at. It's not something I've been tracking. Um, I'll get an occasional call, but now you get into a rate where Bitcoin's dropped off a little bit in price, and I think folks are a little less excited about it. But you don't
Sure.
know what's going to happen in the next week or month. Things of that nature. So that's something to be cognizant of too. At least, you know, for me sitting and looking at it, I have to take a look and watch what's happening with it, because it's a customer that's using a fair amount of power, which means it's a lot of money. So it's a lot of money sitting out there in limbo.
Sure, sure, and with that, and this might be like again going back to like the time in Texas where people are future buying power. Are these customers buying power in advance from you guys, or is that not part of that arrangement?
Currently, they're scheduling their power on the day ahead market. So they're buying it literally off the market. And if you want to know what the
Oh,
market price is, go to MISO's website, the Midwest Independent System Operator, or Mid-Continent, which MISO, and go to their website and look up the LMP prices, and you can see what the prices are at MinHub, just like I can.
oh wow. Okay, so I again didn't know that either. Is that I, probably more elementary questions for you? But I mean, is that just like a pass through you guys, or
Well,
I've never
there's
heard that.
probably
That's so cool.
there's a little bit more to it than that, but to give
Okay.
you an idea of what energy prices are doing in the wholesale market. In our case, please keep in mind that that's also what you're seeing on that LMP on MISO's website is energy only, because there's also the cost of the transmission.
Sure.
So in order for power to get to Glencoe, you need to purchase the power from somebody. It has to travel through the transmission lines. You have to pay whatever rates, and those rates are going to vary based on a lot of different factors. And you have to pay the transmission, and you have to also run it through your distribution system, which means your costs, and ultimately to the end use customer.
Sure. Sure. Uh, it's wildly fascinating. Yeah,
Well,
that's I and what it makes me think of is, did they come to you, Dave, and they had this whole thing figured out in terms of like how the power would work and what the rate structure would look like and how they were going to be getting there, or did they come to you and they were kind of asking questions like me?
We had long conversations.
Okay, okay.
Um,
Makes me feel a little better about it
and,
then.
and I would say that, quite frankly, we both learned a lot from those conversations. I mean, I learn about this every day because, please understand, when I came here to this utility in 2010, I came from an all requirements agency. My previous community was all requirements. So I came here, and the thought of being able to pick and choose which contracts we could or not participate in, that was Greek to me.
Sure.
Uh, so I had to learn on the fast track, and I was fortunate. I had some colleagues that were very helpful, and I spent a lot of time, and I'll tell you, my head still spins on this thing at times. And
Sure.
I turn around and I talk to these guys that know exponentially more than me, and I'm just amazed at the knowledge they have, and all you can do is just try and take it in and add to yours.
Yeah, and that, as you can tell, is also one of the things, but a little bit selfishly on this show is what I'm trying to do is soak in information and learn and just try to dissect some of these conversations that are happening with the Glencoes of the world, and I find that so fascinating to hear how that all comes together.
It's a fun industry. If if I ever get bored in this industry, it'll be the time to leave, and I think I'm gonna be too old and leave because of that, not because I'm bored with it. It's exciting. There's just something new every day.
Yeah, I completely agree, and you're leading nicely into another question I had, which is, in this industry, there's a lot of mature technology, older technology in the industry, but I know that we're having to innovate a lot. Are you can Do you know of some cool innovations that are coming to the space that maybe Bitcoin mining's helping usher in, or just other things that are you know cool, interesting innovations that are coming up?
Well, there's entities that are looking to use hydrogen. There's entities looking at you know micronuclear. Um, and you'll have 50 people say it's great and 50 people say it's terrible, and all of that. It the people are so innovative. They're just coming up with different ways, and how do you build a bigger mousetrap, and that's where it's at right now. And the opinions on power supply and how to use it, they vary so heavily. And then of course reality has to come into play too, and that gets to be maybe a little bit tougher pill to swallow for some folks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does. Yeah. Uh,
It Yeah. Ben, we can go down a rabbit hole on this one.
well, and I know we talked about some of that, and we don't have to go down that path at all. But you know, one of the things that I'm curious about too is the electrical vehicle. So again, we talked at the beginning of the conversation is that addition of electrical needs for a town, for a city, adding electrical vehicles. I mean, my gosh, people are now getting electric pickup trucks. It's just crazy, but
Well, it's changing the potential infrastructure needs that we have. And to give you an example, if you take a one block square area, and all the homes there are heated by natural gas, which is
hmm
pretty common. Okay, so they're all heated by natural gas, and you maybe set a 25 kVA transformer out there, and I know people may or may not understand what that means, but I'll get to that. If you set a 25 kVA transformer out there, and maybe you're feeding four homes out of it, and it handles it just fine.
yep,
Now you turn around, and one or two of those homes, all of a sudden, they go buy a Ford Lightning, or they go buy their EV,
Yep.
put in their charger at home, and next thing you know, that utility might be going out there and changing that 25 out to a 37 and a half or a 50. Going forward for me, the difference in cost between a 25 and a 37 and a half, um, it's almost not enough to bother with anymore, just because of this potential. And
And
we
that
talked about,
meaning it's almost just more cost efficient for you to go put a 37 and a half out there instead.
yeah, you don't want to put, you try and build to the size of what you're serving, because there's also line loss. If you take a really large transformer and set it out there, and it just sits there humming, and we touched on the thing called load factor earlier.
Yep.
Well, and all of a sudden that transformer is running at a 20% load factor. Um, you got a lot of line loss just in that transformer sitting there humming and doing nothing. And line loss isn't recovered by anybody. It's just lost electricity.
Yeah.
So it doesn't pay to do that. So you try and build to that size, but boy, all of a sudden these EVs come in, and boy, you wish they were bigger.
I see
And
what you're saying. Yeah. Yep.
EVs are coming. I mean, that's the push. That's the big thing right now. They're coming. The availability of them is still down pretty good. I don't think you can just walk into a lot and buy one tomorrow like
No.
you could, some other vehicles. But it's coming, and I don't think it's a bad thing. But it's stuff that we have to be cognizant of in this industry.
Sure. Um, yeah, absolutely. And I see what you mean now by putting something too big out there. Yeah, it's a really fine dance. You don't want to put a big transformer out there and hope that a year or two or three, everybody on that block gets an electric vehicle. And then in reality, only two homes get an EV, and then what do you do? You've got a lot of waste there. Yeah.
Well, you go out there and you change the transformer out, and then you also hope that when that customer built the service to their home, that they
Yeah.
built the service large enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, they're building a new service to their home at their cost. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah. And I wonder, and this is just kind of a brainstormy thought, is, what is the thought around, okay, put the bigger transformer out there, kind of like I said, in hopes that the whole block gets an electric vehicle, or the thinking is that eventually they will. And then having like a very, very small scale data center or a little mobile Bitcoin mining operation using the 70-80% that might not be getting used right away. I mean, is that, when you look at like some of the creative use cases for that, is that even on the table? Or have you even thought of
Um,
that?
I would I would say likely not, just simply because the the wires coming out of that transformer are only hitting 4 homes. So you'd have to put that micro data center right next to those 4 homes, or something like that. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Noise.
Well, not just noise, but just space, or the desire for somebody to put it in there, because that transformer needs to be at least in reasonable proximity to the load it's serving. So I mean,
Sure.
if you think about it, you got the transformer on the pole, and you got 4 sets of wires going to 4 different homes. So that's the area that transformer can serve. You can add another wire to it if you put a bigger transformer up there, but you have to have the property, you have to have, the space and the desire of somebody to be there. Otherwise, it's really it'd be difficult to plan for something like that.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I a lot of the reason I ask about that is I think the Bitcoin mining community kind of ends up in this echo chamber, for a lack of a better way to put it, where, all these ideas sound so great when we're talking about them, but then, the realities and the appetite at, like Glencoe, for example, is is a very different story. So it's good to hear that. It's good perspective.
I, that this industry is evolving. It's evolving very rapidly, and it will be interesting to see where it lands.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So one of and this is kind of the closing question, if you will, for the podcast. What I wanted to kind of touch on for kind of the end here is, are there things that the Bitcoin mining industry, from your opinion and the conversations that you've been having, are there better ways that Bitcoin miners could approach a power company?
Um, I think the biggest thing is if they approach the power company with an openness and are willing to work together, um, uh, to create something good. And that actually goes with any customer because, you know, you use the word partnership. Well, you try and partner with all your customers. Now we're not partners with this data mining center. They are a customer that we're serving a load to just like any other customer. Now, I guess I call it kind of partnership because we'll work with any of our customers to try and make things better for them if we can. So our partnership with the data mining facility, I think, has gone very well. The CEO and the COO are really nice people. I've enjoyed all my conversations with them. They've been very accommodating. Uh, we've had many conversations about different things from the business side of it that we need to accomplish, and to make sure that we're taking care of each other. And they've gone very well. A couple of fine people. Been very happy with that organization. So I think the biggest thing is to come in with an openness, and quite frankly, realistic expectations.
I would imagine you've heard some unrealistic expectations in some of these conversations.
Well, some of the tougher things is that somebody comes in and Glencoe was in a fortunate and unique situation when this happened, and that is that we had built a new substation to add some redundancy and reliability to our customers, which put us in a situation where we had some excess capacity in our transformer. And to simplify that, our transformer was big enough that we had a lot of spare room in it.
Sure.
In anticipation of growth, and also because of a second substation we built. We needed the second substation, but we didn't need a ton of it right away. So we were fortunate that we had that room. I would tell you that, with the exception of some of the large G&Ts, I would venture to guess that this data mining facility will consume 1.5 times as much electricity in a calendar year as our previous load was.
Oh wow. That's substantial.
So yeah, if you take, I don't know, 80 million kilowatt hours in a year that we usually sold, uh, we'll sell 120 more million now. So being able to have that infrastructure readily available is tough. If you turn around and go to, especially to a small utility, and ask me if they've got 10 megawatts of space, they're going to say no. They likely
Right.
don't.
Right.
So in order to serve that big load, you're looking at potentially building a substation, and the lines associated with that. And with lead times the way they are now on materials, if I want to order a transformer tomorrow, I'm a year and a half out.
A year and a half out.
Oh yeah, for a big substation transformer, yeah,
Oh,
you can be a year and a half out. We have components that I order on any. I had this conversation with my line foreman today, and with our office controller, um, and I'm using ballpark numbers here, but if you go back 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, I think that a lot of utilities, I know we carried a lot less inventory because we didn't need to. If we needed a widget
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow, we'd call up today and we'd have it tomorrow or the next day and we're good. If we needed 20,000 feet of wire, we'd call up and in 2 days we'd have 20,000 feet of wire. I ordered wire back in, I don't know, October a year ago, and it got here 4 months later, 5 months later.
Wow.
So now all of a sudden utilities are forced to inventory a lot more than they have just because of lead times. And it's not just utilities; it's anything. I mean, I had problems with my furnace this week, and I called up the furnace guy, and he said I could probably have the part in 3 days. I said, I'm in Minnesota.
Yeah. That's not gonna cut it. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the realistic expectations is how fast you can actually build out.
Sure. And I know I said that was kind of my last question, but to add on to that, I mean, it takes a lot of trust then to work with a group knowing that it could take a year to build out, and with Bitcoin being so volatile, are you guys going to stick around? Can you guys hang on for a year before we turn you on? And I mean that's not even just Bitcoin mining. I mean that could be a manufacturing plant. Can they handle a year delay on the start time of their manufacturing plant?
We had a customer in Glencoe that wanted to put in a business,
Mm-hmm.
and due to supply chain issues, they've been building this thing for over a year and a half
Jeez.
just for their structures. And I don't know if it's their fault, their supplier's fault, whose fault it is. It's none of my business. It's just what I've observed. And I know they have a desire to get going. But yeah, that's just the way it is, unfortunately, today.
Yeah, it's the world we're living in right now.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, if I could come up with the cure-all for that, I'm thinking I'd be charging you for this podcast, man. But I certainly don't have the answer to it, and I don't know if anybody does. But there's a lot of minds that are looking at it and trying to figure out how we can,
Yeah.
take care of that issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dave, I really appreciate the conversation today. It's good to hear, how Glencoe views the business model and the business side and the sourcing of power. That's wildly fascinating for me to hear more about that. Being born and raised here and not knowing that type of power sourcing, was how it worked here is that's really cool to hear about that. And then to hear how you guys are working with a pretty large Bitcoin mining company and making that work. It's really cool to hear that. I really appreciate your opinions and your insights, and I appreciate your time.
It's been a lot of fun. I like the industry and I like visiting about it. So you take care.
All right. Thanks, Dave.